There's a famous American minister who preaches in New York City. His name is Tim Keller. And he has said that everyone worships something. The only choice that you get is what to worship. Everyone worships something. Now, by that, he doesn't mean that everyone gathers in a room designed for worship and engages in something that looks like a religion. What he means to say is that everyone is stirred to awe by something. And everyone, having been so stirred to awe, will strive after that for even more. Everyone worships something. Now, Keller would say that in our culture, in our time, and in our place, some people worship God, but many others worship things like money or power or even sex. And when people worship those things, they don't get down on their hands and knees. They don't pray to them. They don't engage in behavior that looks like a religious worship. But having been so awe-inspired, so tantalized by these things, they orient their lives towards them, and they strive after them. Everyone worships something because everyone is stirred to awe by something, and everyone strives after something with all that they are. I'm reminded in Keller's famous quote of some times in my life where I was stirred to awe, and I was moved to try and strive after something. Now, many of you know that I'm a golfer, and I started playing golf when I was a youth, and I played some junior golf tournaments. And I'll never forget the time that my friends and I went to watch the professional golf tour for the first time. One year we went to watch the Canadian Open tournament in Oakville. And we went on the Saturday of the tournament. And we got there a little bit before the tee-off times were scheduled to begin. And so we had not much choice except to go to the driving range, the warm-up range where the golfers would practice or warm up for their rounds. And there were some bleachers behind the teeing area. And we sat there, and we saw one by one these golfers come out to warm up for their round. And these were not players that we'd ever heard of. They were not stars. And we were fans. We knew many of the players, but we'd never heard of these players. And they came out, and they started hitting shots like we had never seen before. If you've never been to a professional golf event, what you find there is that the players hit shots that are awe-inspiring. Their worst shots are longer and higher and straighter than the best shot you've ever seen before. And we were in awe, and we wanted to strive after that so badly. I had the pleasure a few years ago of spending some time at the Palace of Westminster on a trip to London. Now, you might know the Palace of Westminster as the British Parliament building. And some of you have no doubt seen it. From the outside, it's the most beautiful building I've ever seen. It's perfect. It's constructed beautifully, and it's grand design, and yet all along the outside is some incredible detail and artwork created by master tradespersons. It's an absolutely stunning a beautiful building situated so perfectly along the edge of the Thames. And I had the opportunity to go inside the Palace of Westminster. And I did a little bit of wandering around in the parts of the building that were open to the public, and I went into the House of Lords and watched some debate, and then I went into the House of Commons and watched a question period. What a beautiful place. And what an awe-inspiring place to think about its historical significance and the impact that the institutions so representative had on our world and have had on the country of ours in which I grew up. Awe-inspiring. No doubt there are experiences upon which you reflect, which have inspired you to awe. Likely you can think of moments that so inspired you that you decided that you would strive after that continued inspiration with everything that you have. The Apostle Paul, in his first letter to the Corinthians, spoke to this natural inclination we have to worship. And he wrote to the congregation in the city of Corinth that those of you who are Jews demand signs. Those of you who are Greeks seek wisdom. For a Jew, a sign is like another way of saying a miracle. But not just any old miracle. A sign in the biblical way of thinking is some kind of act of God which would point to the clear identity of the nation of Israel as the people of God. What Jews wanted was signs or reminders of their chosen people status. Jews longed for things like the parting of the waters of the sea, that the Israelites, led by Moses, might go through on dry ground. They longed for signs like manna and quails from heaven as the people wandered in the wilderness going hungry. And they longed for signs like water coming from a rock when the people were thirsty in the desert. They longed for signs like the tiny army of Israel being somehow able to defeat the larger and the mightier army of some foreign empire. Some signs that they were God's chosen people, that God had a plan and a purpose for them. The Greeks, conversely, sought wisdom. The Greek culture was that of philosophy. They had the great and the famous, celebrated, wise philosophers whose works are still read in school today. They sought to incorporate wisdom and insight and clarity of thought into every part of their lives and their culture. The earliest forms of democracy began in Athens, coming out of the philosophical reflections of the sages of their culture. These are the things sought for in the first century and in the time of Paul and of the early Christian churches. In contrast, said Paul, we Christians have little more than foolishness. We have the foolishness of a crucified Messiah. That's foolishness, you see, because the Messiah and a crucifixion are incompatible things. The Messiah is the saving one of God. Crucifixion, in contrast, was the most brutal form of execution in antiquity. Not only was crucifixion the most painful way to die for a victim, it was the most degrading and humiliating one. Now, the Romans, for instance, who crucified Jesus, crucified people not just to kill them, but to degrade them and to send a message to anyone else who might think about crossing their might. And the fact that Jesus was so put to death was proof of nothing else but that he was not the Messiah. The saving one of God could not suffer this fate. And yet this is what the Christians believed, such foolishness. Paul went on to say that not only is there this Messiah's foolishness, we have foolish preachers. Those who get up in their fear and in their trembling and proclaim this absurd message, even in the face of mocking and ridicule. Those who make such a poor show of it, these foolish preachers. What is more, said Paul, we have so many foolish Christians. The people who follow after this foolish Messiah and who listen to these foolish preachers. Paul even said to the Corinthians, not many of you are very impressive by worldly standards. I mean, I would never say that to you, but Paul said it to the Corinthians. We're in a big foolish exercise, he said. Why? Well, Paul went on to say that we are engaged in this foolish thing so that eventually we might come to boast in God. For you see, said Paul, the foolishness of God is wiser than any human wisdom. The weakness of God is stronger than any human strength. God works in ways that seem foolish and weak and unattractive to us, so that through the eyes of faith we might see that in fact it is God who is at work. If God worked in ways that were evidently wise and strong and attractive and impressive to everyone, we would have a hard time deciphering whether our devotion was being directed towards God or if it was being directed to these otherwise impressive things. In working in the unexpected ways that God does, God is sifting out our hearts. God is seeing whether it is towards our Creator that we orient our lives, if it is towards God Himself that we we strive, seeking after ever greater awe. God is helping us figure that out as well. In ages past, it was common for Christians to think of this process of coming to faith as the sifting of our hearts. Like the famous words of the battle hymn of the Republic, "He is sounding forth the trumpet that shall never call retreat. He is sifting out the hearts of men before his judgment seat. So be swift, my soul, to answer him. Be jubilant, my feet. Our God is marching on." Quite a few years ago now, I was in my process towards becoming an ordained minister in the United Church, and I was serving as what they called an intern in a congregation. And I remember one time, after having been given the task of conducting a Sunday service, one of the members of the congregation wrote to the minister who was my supervisor a rather scathing and critical letter about my performance. And I don't remember the exact details of the criticism, what it was that I had done wrong or inadequately, but I do remember being read the phrase from this letter, "If William wants to impress a congregation." And I remember thinking at the time, I do not accept the premise of this criticism. I do not come to work. I do not serve to impress people. I serve to worship God. Sometimes we in the church have a misconception about what it is that we do, what it is that is going on. That is true for everyone in the church, be it members of a congregation or ministers as well. Sometimes we think that up here is the stage, and the people up here perform for the audience. Quite in contrast, however, we would be better to see that this whole church, better yet, our whole world as the stage, and God is the audience. We live and work and think and feel that we might give God praise. May we be so stirred to awe by the great and the mighty and the merciful, loving acts of God that we seek evermore to strive after such awe and give God praise. Amen.